and talk a little bit more about money, but now we're going to talk about it in the context of the impacts of monetary policy on the economy, kind of bring back our aggregate demand, aggregate supply, loanable funds, kind of try to see how it's connected together because economists are in the prediction business. And so if the Fed is following restrictive policy, what does that mean for us real world people? And what does it mean for, what are the implications for the long term and the short term? So that's what we're going to crack into. So we're going to hit the money market here. So the money market explains changes in the equilibrium amount of money. I'll put in parentheses like M2 that we learned from last week. The amount of money in circulation and the interest rate, which is kind of the money interest rate or nominal interest rate. Interest rate I equals the money rate or nominal rate. Those are all just kind of fancy words for if you go into a bank and ask for a home loan and they tell you, well, we can do it for 6.75%, that's what this is, right? The money rate, kind of the over-the-counter rate, so to speak, that the bank's going to charge. Now, we've learned already that investors want to take into account the real rate of interest, which takes into account what? We hear the word real. What's been taken into account? Inflation. So we've got the kind of over-the-counter rate. So imagine that, oh, well, I'll give you a loan for 6.75%. But if the inflation rate turns out to be 6.75%, how much did the investor really earn in terms of purchasing power? If they charged 6.75% for the loan, but then inflation turned out to be 6.75%. Nothing. They didn't gain anything in terms of the amount of groceries they can put in their grocery cart when the borrower pays back their loan a year from now. Inflation has eroded all of the reasons why you made the investment in the first place. So it's real important to take that into consideration as an investor or banker or otherwise. That's why I'd say inflation is probably, especially nowadays, one of the top things that you guys get out of this macroeconomics class. That's important kind of moving forward to hopefully take into account anyway as you make some decisions. Not every decision, of course. Most of them are not inflation related. But we also get to the luxury of taking it for granted. I might even, Nadia, you grew up a little bit in Zimbabwe when there was heavy inflation? Or not really, or were you too little? Kind of? Okay. My point in bringing that up is we had the three biggies for the economy. What was the three biggies that we hope our policymakers are taking into account? We haven't reviewed the biggies for a while here. There was three things, bullet lists, that we kind of want to be mindful of, especially as we get into this chapter.
What chapter?
The three biggies. Would have been when we started the week 2 or 3. Way back when. We've reiterated them a couple times over, though. The three biggies that we hope all policymakers are taking into account. Ben Bernanke, the chair of the Reserve, Joe Biden and Congress, and anybody else that wields some power on policy. What were the three biggies that all economies should be kind of keeping an eye on? What's desired.
There, not it.
Low and stable inflation is one of them. Somebody else with another one. Tim?
Increasing real GDP.
Increasing real GDP. And what'd you find? One more.
That's the one I
Oh, okay. You just found it in isolation, not all three of them at the same spot. Fernando? Low unemployment. Yeah. So we're kind of going to rehash those things this week, especially as we work through the implications of policies on things. So we hope when they make a move, like restricting the money supply, that they're thinking about, okay, well, ultimately, long-term, we want real GDP increasing, which is the quantity of beer, pizza, and chicken wings, right? Per person, if we talked about real GDP per person, that's kind of our best measure of material well-being for the society, right? The amount of stuff we have per person, and of course, GDP is also the income of the nation, so you can equally think of it as the income per person on average for the nation. So we want income per person growing. We don't want to do stupid stuff that causes the economy to shrink. Does that make sense? That'd be kind of dumb, right? If that was their motive. So are we doing activities to increase long-term GDP? All right. And then we had low and stable inflation and then low unemployment. So we haven't talked about unemployment for a while. Is 0 our goal for unemployment? We want to shoot for a 0 unemployment rate?
No.
No. That would probably be an unhealthy thing to even pursue. Why? Why does a healthy economy expect some unemployment? Some people should be unemployed in a healthy, dynamic, growing economy. By the way, it might suck for them for a little bit, but hopefully in a healthy, dynamic economy, they'll find another job pretty quickly. Simon? What's that? Job competition, yes, is a healthy thing. So I feel comfortable leaving one job to go get another job even though I don't have one lined up, right? So that was frictional unemployment. So there's going to be people moving around in the job market in a healthy, dynamic, vibrant economy. People are going to feel comfortable about leaving their job without having another one lined up. That means you're unemployed, right? But it's not a bad sign of unemployment. It can be a healthy sign. We also had you guys graduating, remember that? So you graduate college and you're like, oh crap, I need to find a job. You just became unemployed. As soon as you start looking for a job, actively seeking employment, is the fact that we have a bunch of new graduates out in the world a bad thing for society? Of course not, right? So we got reasons why people are unemployed that we'd expect to have in a healthy economy. So we said that the healthy expected long-term unemployment rate had a name that begins with an N. What type of unemployment was it? What level? Historically been between 4 and 6%. I think most economists are thinking we're probably in around the 4 to 5% now. It began with an N when we had only frictional and structural unemployment. Structural is where jobs are becoming obsolete, like DVD players or something like that. Tim? The natural rate, yes. So we naturally expect there to be unemployment in a healthy economy, the natural rate of unemployment. So when the economy's doing real well, we'd expect there to be some unemployment. All right, so we got increasing real GDP. We've got low unemployment or unemployment around the natural rate of unemployment. And then where we're really tying in here, this chapter, is with low and stable inflation. And so the low and stable part is what us Americans, for the most part, have enjoyed for a long period of time. And so that means we don't have to think about inflation when we go on with our daily lives. If inflation was 2% 10 years ago, 2% 7 years ago, 2%, 1.9% 3 years ago, 2.1% 6 years ago, right? It's like we're kind of used to that, and we can kind of not have to take it into account for the most part for living our daily lives. The reason I brought up with Nadia and other countries that we've talked about, like Argentina when I visited there, is those people are very mindful of high volatile inflation. They're changing their personal behavior because of the inflation. They get their paycheck, and they try to go buy groceries right away, right? I mean, it's your daily life that's being impacted by inflation. So we hopefully will get back to low and stable inflation. We're not there yet within the United States after some of the monetary policy that went on here in response to how they handled the COVID bonds. The government spending a whole bunch of money in a way that I didn't think was very wise, and then equally unwise, the Federal Reserve gobbling up all those bonds and creating the inflation that we now have to think about and pay for at the cash register. All right, so that is, did I ever answer my question? I think I did. Somewhere here. So money in circulation and the interest rate, or the nominal rate, through the demand and supply of money. Okay, so draw a nice graph here where we're measuring the quantity of money. So the real quantity of money. For the most part, we can just think of it as the quantity of money. So for example, M2 maybe. Could be M1, but M2 is the one that's the most widely used measure. So what were all the components of M2 from last week? Start listing them. M2, what's in there? Justin?
M1.
M1, good. M1 is what though? I'm going to push you on that.
It's all cash plus checking.
Okay, so it's checking accounts, yes. It is a form of cash, but not the vault cash. That's actually the monetary base. In circulation. It's the currency that's out there in the real world, right? Circulating around. So M1 is currency in circulation plus checking accounts. And then somebody other than Justin, what else do we add on now to make it M2? What are some other things? Just shout them out. Nick, savings accounts, good. What else?
Small time deposits.
Small time deposits, good. And there's one more. That's the small time deposit thing. You can look back in your notes. So M2 is M1 plus savings accounts plus time deposits, small time deposits, plus, there's one more. Money market, good, Mary. So money market account. So adding all of that stuff together ends up being around $17 trillion, $15 to $17 trillion over time. And so we're looking at that versus the interest rate. And so the demand for money demand, let's see, and I think your textbook just puts a D down. I guess they did write it out. I'm going to write it out. So money demand. So money demand, MD, the MD curve there is downward sloping. And it shows the quantity of money demanded at various interest rates. Given real GDP. And the expected price level. Okay, so why is it downward sloping? So why is money demand downward sloping. So if we have an interest rate of 5%, people would like to hold their wealth in the form of money to, let's just call it 15 trillion. And if the interest rate falls to 4% or at 4%, they're holding 16 trillion. So why are they holding their wealth more in the form of money when interest rates are lower? So interest rates are lower for the economy, and they're choosing to have, and I always like, when I was in your guys' seats, when I was trying to memorize some of this stuff, is I always thought, well, how much money am I holding in my wallet, right? So right now, I just picked out one of my envelopes here. I got $6. What causes me to, transform holding more money or less money and starting to walk around with, $50 instead of $4? What do I do with this stuff? What's the primary function for holding money in currency, in the form of currency?
Tip your waiters?
For what?
Tipping your waiters?
Tipping your waiters, okay. Yeah, you guys have to be a little bit, maybe even currency's not a good idea. This is part of M2, but can you tip your waiter? Jesse said tipping your waiter. Can you tip your waiter with Venmo? Sure. Can you tip your waiter with your debit card? Sure. Is your debit card is linked to what? Your checking account. So when I'm holding it in the form of currency, I'm also thinking about money that you're holding in your checking account or your savings account as well. So what do you do with checking account money and currency? What's the primary purpose for it? Yeah, live your everyday life. You buy it, right? So it's really what we call your transactions demand. So we have, so let me just put a little note here before I answer the question. So I'm going to have probably multiple notes. So number one, currency and checking is primarily used for what we call transactions demand. As Tim said, living your life. I need some toilet paper. I need some groceries, right? I'm going to go to the movies tonight. So the purchases that you're making on a regular basis, we'd call transactions demand. All right, so now, what causes us to hold more or less money in our wallet? Here we're focusing in on this question of why is it downward sloping, which means it's interest rate driven. It's interest rate driven. And so my second note here is, what is your wealth? So what is your wealth equation? When we want to calculate somebody's wealth, what are we doing?
You're taking all their assets and I forgot the word for it.
So yeah, you're getting close here, Madison.
Did we learn about this in personal finance?
Yes.
Is it what you
I was
know?
hoping there's quite a few of you that have personal finance. I'm hoping this would stick in your head. It's not an accounting type definition. It's the easy peasy Russ invented. What is it?
What you own minus what you
What you own minus what you owe. Good. So wealth is what you own, the dollar value of what you own minus the dollar value of your debts or what you owe. What you own minus what you owe. I'll start writing up here. And so now I want to be a little more, maybe slightly more sophisticated here, just for this point anyway. Your wealth, what you own, could be your currency in your hand, plus your checking account balance, plus stocks and bonds, so stock market investments. Plus bond investments. So we talked about this a couple weeks ago with the investing chapter and kind of the rates of return. What's the difference between stock market, owning stocks and owning bonds? Just real briefly, I don't want to get too sidetracked here, but I think it's important for the process. What's the fundamental difference between a stock and a bond? Anybody want to take a stab at that? Maybe back here somewhere? Tim?
A bond is basically like a loan.
Okay.
And the stock is a partial percentage of the
Yeah. So if you have a stock in Tesla, you own part of the company along with Elon Musk, right? You are partners with Elon Musk, right? And of course, we all know it's kind of silent partner, like you don't, but you do technically own a very tiny, tiny fraction of Tesla. If you have a bond with Tesla, a corporate bond, you have effectively loaned money to Elon Musk. You loaned money to Tesla. And so the bond is going to come back to you with kind of loan payments, essentially, is how you make your money. So one is a loan and one is ownership. All right, so I kind of wanted to bring up the bond thing here because it's going to tie in nicely with interest rates. We can have a discussion with the stock market too. But if interest rates fall, do you want to hold more bonds or less bonds if you are an investor in bonds and interest rates are falling? Less, right? The rate of return is falling for bonds. So what are you doing? You're like, oh, well, I might as well just hold this as cash. So we're going to be moving money from bond. I'm going to sell some of my bonds maybe and move them into my checking account, right? I'm going to have higher, I might as well spend the money today. Wall Street's not paying me much money anyway. So you're going to shift from one type of holding to the other. All right, so that's the idea with our transactions demand being dependent, at least in part, by the interest rates going on. So kind of the key point here, why is the money demand curve downward sloping? So now we'll get to our, better put the word answer since we had so much in between. So the answer, the opportunity cost of holding currency slash cash slash checking. The opportunity cost of holding cash is less when interest rates fall. Parentheses, you are not losing as much being out of the bond market. So as usual in economics class, many of our answers come down to opportunity cost. It's probably even easier to think about it the opposite direction. So example. suppose interest rates increase from 1% to 7%. When you're getting a really good rate of return on investing, what might you do if interest rates climb from 1 to 7%?
Buy more.
Buy more bonds, and then what happens to your checking account? If you're buying bonds, what happens to your checking account to buy them? Does it go up or down? Down, right? You're moving money now from your checking account into Wall Street. You're shifting your money, and so that causes the money supply to fall. So suppose interest rates increase from 1 to 7%. What is the impact on the quantity of money demanded? You're going to increase bond holdings and effectively decrease checking account. Why am I sitting on all this money? I'm missing out on some high interest, right? The opportunity cost has gone up. The opportunity cost of holding M2 increased. So then we're going to move the other direction. So what comes out of this then is that the interest rate is the price of holding money. Put this in green. Lots of money here. It's a key point. Little I is the opportunity cost of holding cash. Am I getting any interest when this stuff is sitting in my wallet? No. So there's an implicit cost. You might think, oh, it's free. I just, $1 is $1, right? But it's not free if it could be in some sort of investment, right? So it's the opportunity cost of holding cash. All right, so that kind of sets up this part of it. Any questions so far? All right. Money supply. All right, money supply. All right, so the quantity of money, in circulation is controlled by the central bank. The Fed in the US. Who controls the euro, my Frenchmen? Specifically, I normally just put the Fed here, but since I have some international students, who controls the euro?
European Central Bank?
The European Central Bank, yes. So We'll put a little extra note for our foreigners, and of course Tim just left, but this applies to Germany too. So note, the ECB, the European Central Bank, the ECB, instead of the Fed, you usually refer to it as the ECB. The ECB did this or that. Controls the euro. Maybe I'll put euro money supply. Tim, you missed it. Oh wait, let's test Tim. Tim, what is the central bank for the euro?
For the euro.
Yeah, what's it called? Who controls the euro? You ever heard of the ECB? The European Central Bank? I'm sure you have. Once you heard it, I put you on the spot after going to the bathroom. I assume anyway is what you did. So, European Central Bank. All right. So, they control it with the 3 tools, or the 4 tools, rather. So, M2 is controlled with the 4 tools. What are the 4 tools? See if we can rattle them off without looking back in our notes, just for fun. Let's see. Anybody shout one out if you got it. 4 tools of the Fed.
Open market operations.
Open market operations is one. That's probably the most important one, really. Open, now you can look back in your notes since somebody's really going crazy here. Open market operations. Give me another one.
The one where they make money off the savings account, or is that or something?
Yes. What do we call that? Yeah.
Is it increasing the interest rates?
What kind of interest rate?
Through
Because open market operations influences interest rates too. So, but there's there's 2 interest rates that we talked about as the tools, but you got to be specific on what they are.
loans to
Discount.
Loans to the bank is the discount rate, right? So changing the discount rate. That's the loan to banks. What was the other interest rate one?
Interest.
That's the one that we spent a lot of time on.
Interest on reserve.
Interest on reserves. So interest on reserves. And then finally, the one that almost doesn't get used anymore, but it's still in theory on the books. What was the last one? Number 4. Required if you want to edit your notes. Required reserve ratio. So they set the amount that banks cannot loan out, right? So all of this is kind of related to manipulating the money supply. So here's their tools, and so that gives us a money supply curve that we model as vertical because they're choosing what level to do. So we got a vertical money supply curve. And so then we can look at the money supply shifters. So number 1 is one of these tools. So Fed uses one of the tools. So which one causes the money supply to grow? Which one causes the money supply to grow? An open market purchase or an open market sale? Tim? Purchase. So let's double check, see if Tim's right. So let's see. A purchase means the bond is floating around on Wall Street, right? I'll give you the honor. So I'm Jerome Powell. and I'm going to go purchase the bond from Tim, who bought it 2 years ago from Biden, what happened to the money supply? It went up, right? So now the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, is holding on to the bond asset, a US government bond, can be corporate bonds or other things too, and so we have an increase in the money supply. So example, a purchase leads to an increase in the money supply. So we'll kind of use a little shorthand. Now graphically, with the way we've got this going, it's going to be a shift to the right. So what happened now you're going to see the use of the model here. What happened to interest rates if we did an open market purchase and increased the money supply? What happened to interest rates? Just look at that graph. It went down, right? So if we started here with our initial equilibrium with MS1, that means we started off here with interest rates at 5%, and using the notation we've been doing, we'll put I2 here. The new interest rate is lower at 4%. So an increase in the money supply leads to a decrease in interest rates. Okay, so number 2 on the shifter list is just simply an announcement. An announcement of a future Fed action. So we're going to continue to talk this week about expectations, unanticipated, anticipated changes. So now the Fed didn't even buy a stinking bond yet, right? The Fed didn't do squat. Just simply said the words, we're going to do some buying, right? Now, does Wall Street react when they say something?
Absolutely.
Yes, because they're going to try to be on the front end of those changes. So knowing that interest rates are going to be coming down, they might be able to make some moves ahead of time to capture some easy profit. So announcement of a Fed future action. So did not do it yet, but said it will. All right, so example. What is the relationship? Yeah.
Did it ever happen the Fed said it's going to do something but never did it?
That's a great question, and that's probably the only way they could have some effective policy is to lie to us. But so there have probably been examples where that happened, but they were responding to something else that happened that was unknown at the time they said it, if that makes sense. So, they'd be very careful with their wording. We plan to pursue expansionary policy, assuming that, the World War III doesn't break out, COVID doesn't break out, whatever. So they kind of leave themselves, if conditions persist the way they are today, then we're going to pursue that. Okay, so what is the relationship? Yeah, kind of the ceteris paribus thing. So relationship of the price of a bond and the interest rate. Interest rates go down. Does anybody know what happens to the price of a bond? Does it go up or down? Price of bond and the interest rates. Does So I wouldn't expect you to know this. We've had a little bit, I think the book's covered maybe a little bit of it. I've never explicitly put it on the board, and I'm not going to go into great detail here. Happy to talk to some of you after class a little bit, but it's always an inverse relationship. So if interest rates are falling, the prices of bonds are rising. So inverse. So an increase, let's start with a decrease. A decrease in the interest rate leads to an increase in the price of a bond. So we've gone over multiple times how these are out on the street, right? And Joe Biden wrote a 5-year bond with a fixed payment of $50,000 a year, and this was a $1 million bond at the beginning of its time. And so $50,000 a year on $1 million is a 5% effective interest rate, right? But that was 5 years ago. So now the price of this instrument, when Madison goes to sell it to Tim, Tim sells it to Tucker, and this was all 1 year apart, the value of this government bond in any given year after it started is related to the current interest rate environment. So let me put it to you this way. If the interest rates 2 years after this was written, this is effectively a 5% rate of return. You guys okay with me on that? $50,000 on $1 million piece of paper that Joe Biden has to pay back eventually. 5% bond. If today's interest rates are 3% 2 years into this, is this more valuable or less valuable than $1 million? You're holding a 5% rate of return from a very good lender, the US government. You're holding something that returns 5%. Interest rates are low. Is this a valuable piece of paper now? Yes. And so this is going to sell at a higher price. This bond, the 5-year-old bond that's 2 years old, is going to sell at a premium. It's going to sell at a higher price. All right, so again, I didn't want to get too deep into the weeds, but that's where it's coming from. And related to this, if you're a Wall Street trader and they made an announcement that in the future they're planning to decrease interest rates, would you like to own some bonds today so that they go up in price later? Buy low, sell high? So as the announcement, this bond was just selling, let's just say for $1 million, just say it was selling at par. But then they made this announcement. Oh, if I can go buy a bond this second, like 1 second after, literally 1 second by the way, probably microseconds now, a second after the announcement was made, if I buy this thing now for $1 million, and then over the course of the next month, the Fed starts to do this action, buy low, and now this thing's worth 1.1 million, I just made $100,000, right? Buy low, sell high. So people are reacting to these announcements and causing some changes possibly before the Fed even does anything. Okay. Does that make sense? Just kind of playing on the expectations and Fed not necessarily having to do anything for them. Okay, inverse. So let's put the key point here. So if Fed announces buy today and sell at higher price a bond tomorrow. Buy low, sell high. All right. So, and then that holds true for any of these other relationships, right? Any of these other shifters. All right, any questions there? All right, money demand shifters. Number one, It's the thing we held constant in the beginning. A change in real GDP, which is a change in real income. If you get a $20,000 pay raise, you were making $40,000, and they just love you. Gosh, you came from Ottawa University and you've just been ripping it up at our company. I heard that you're thinking about leaving. I know some quality talent like you might leave our company. We're going to bump you up to $60,000. What do you do with this in your wallet when you're earning $20,000 more? Do you tend to hold more of this in here or less of it? If you just got a $20,000 raise. More, right? More in your checking account, more you're raising your standard of living, you're buying ribeye steaks instead of hamburger, right? You're spending a decent amount of that new pay raise you got. And so that's what's going on here. An increase in income leads to more spendable money being held for transactions. At each interest rate. So at 5% and real GDP of 21 trillion, that's what the nation's money demand was 15 trillion. But at 23 trillion, at 5%, I want to hold this much. At 4%, I used to want to hold 16 trillion, but now I want to hold more money. And so the money demand at 23 trillion is located to the right of where it was before. So an increase in real GDP leads to an increase in money demand. And then most importantly, for wrapping up our predictions here, what influence does that have on interest rates when we have the demand for money going up? What direction are interest rates heading? Now, to do this, you kind of want to pick MS1 or MS2. Maybe let's just pick on MS1 here. What kind of influence does an increase in money demand have on interest rates holding constant money supply at MS1? They're going up or down when the demand for money goes up? I see enough blank stares that we need to redraw here. Draw one money supply. Money demand 1, money demand 2.
What was the question again?
What happens to the interest rate?
Doesn't seem to move, but I bet that's not the right answer.
Doesn't seem to move? It goes up, goes way up. So remember now, you were kind of thinking the money supply doesn't move. That stays. That's why I wanted to draw a new picture here, because I saw plenty of confused looks. So here we got M21, quantity of money, but interest rates rise from I1 to I2. So we move from point A to point B if you want to look at going from equilibrium. Holding constant the money supply, an increase in money demand leads to an increase in interest rates. All right, we will pick up there tomorrow.